let's look at the flipbook object in WizCreate. In the object menu, select the flipbook, which is by default this little puppy here. Let's first just open this flipbook and see what's already inside by default. So within the flipbook editor, you'll see a couple of tabs that you don't typically see in other objects. You're used to seeing properties and scripting, but this one also contains frames and data. Let's click on frames and see what's in this one already. So frames in this flipbook comes with one frame preloaded, which is this puppy here. Let's edit that by going into the media library through the image property, and under cartoons, animals, and these series folders, you'll find a couple of preloaded stop motion animation photos that you can use for flipbooks. So we've got the black dog series, the brown dog series, and there's also a panda, which maybe for the sake of illustration today, I'll use the panda series. So within here, you're gonna see 5 photos that you could use. So you'll notice each of these, they look very similar, but there's just slight differences to them. So for instance, it looks to me like maybe panda 1 and 2 would work in sequence for walking. So I'm gonna choose panda 1, and then I'm just gonna clone that to make a second frame, and then go back in and edit that second frame. Back into the media library, cartoons, animals, and then panda series. So as soon as I do, you can see the flipbook start flipping through those 2 frames. So if you ever, when you were a kid, if you ever had one of those little books that you could thumb through it very quickly and the pages would come together to look like a moving animation, that's essentially the inspiration behind this flipbook object. So you can see now this panda is walking, and all we had to do there was choose 2 different frames for it to flip between. Let's say that we wanted a little bit of a kind of a delay between the 2 frames. You could clone frame number 1, which would mean that it was technically, as it's going through it, it's doing that first view where it's sitting still like that is happening an extra time before it loops back to the beginning and goes through. So let's look back in the properties of the flipbook and check out what some of the options are that we have here. We're going to save the source dataset bit for last as it coincides with the data tab there. We're not going to look at that one just yet. A lot of these others are going to look really similar to what you've already seen in a bunch of other objects. You can change the name, which we'll call this one panda walking. Its position, its angle, whether or not it's draggable, the leaf trail, trail thickness, and trail color, along with scaling mode. Those are all things that you see in the image object, which you're likely very familiar with at this point. And then the animation duration. So adjusting this animation duration is going to control the entire length of the time for the flipbook to take to flip through all the frames. So for instance, since this is 3 frames, let's say that I put in a duration of 3. What that means is that every single frame is going to get 1 second of time within the animation. Whereas if I were to change this to 1, then every frame is getting about 0.3333 repeating seconds per frame. Let's even that out a little bit. I'm going to clone frame number 2 so that we have 2 here. So now, with the 1 second duration, every frame here is getting 1/4 of a second, which is a little bit easier math there. There are 2 key scripts associated with the flipbook. To show those off, I'm actually going to make a second flipbook here. I'm going to clone this. We've got panda walking, and I'll make panda jumping too. So flipbook number 2, I'm going to rename as panda jumping. I'm going to go back into my frames, and I'm going to look for the frame in that panda series that looked like the panda might be jumping. Okay, so here's a jumping one. Rather than finding that a second time in the media library, I'm going to use a little shortcut, opening up the raw value of this second frame's image, and then I copy it and then paste it into frame number 4. So you could go into here and rename each frame to something like still, but you can't repeat names. See, if I try to name this one also still, it's going to tell me duplicate names are not allowed. So you could just leave these as they are. It's really up to you. I always say you need to get in the good practice of renaming things helpfully, but in this case, you may not need the frame names as often. You could just leave them as is, but for the sake of illustration, we've got still 1, jump 1, still 2, jump 2. Okay, so we have 2 different flipbooks. What I'm going to do is also add an image. Then I'm going to make the same position and size as this flipbook. I'm going to copy the position and size property of flipbook number 1, which was panda walking. and I'm going to paste that into the position and size of the image object. And then what I also want to do is grab the raw value of the panda that's just standing still. I'm going to copy that and paste it into the image object here. Okay, so now I've got a panda standing still, a panda walking, and a panda jumping. I'm also going to take that same position and size, copy it, and paste that into the jumping. So now all three of these objects are right on top of each other. It's a little bit too much going on, so I'm going to go into those two flipbooks and turn their visibility off for now. Next up, I'm going to add a button, and what I want this button to do is make this panda jump. So I'm going to change its title to Jump. And I'll make a couple changes to its properties just to get it updated to look a little bit different. Okay, so when this button's touched, I need to do a couple things. I would like to hide this image object, which I'm going to rename to just plain panda. So I want to hide this panda image and show the flipbook of the panda jumping. So to do that, first up I'm going to rename my button here to Jump. Then I'm going to go into scripting through the trigger when button is touched and open up the script library under Animation and Set Properties, and I would like to get the Set Visibility script. So I need to use this script actually 2 times. We're going to configure the first one first. So object type that we want to set the visibility of first is an image named panda, and we want the visibility to be turned off. I'm going to set the transition to dissolve, and the duration I'm just going to keep it to the default of 0.6 seconds. I'm going to clone that and then edit this second one to set a flipbook named panda jumping visibility on. So I'm going to click run and test this out. When I tap this button, we should see this image disappear and the jumping panda replace it. And we do. Okay, let's make a second button that's going to make the panda walk. So when this button is touched, we still need the image of the panda to get visibility turned off. And instead of setting the visibility of panda jumping to on, we want to set the visibility of panda walking to on. So let's test that out. Great, that works, but we need it to walk. So let's add another script. And before we do, I want to check the position of where this is right now. It's currently at 1330, which I'm seeing here. I'll click on this so you can see it a little bit larger. It's at just about 1330. So what I'm going to do is I want this panda to walk to maybe right there. So let's say 60, 30. And for the sake of cleaning this up, I'm actually going to round out that 30.46 to 30, which means I also need to do that for my other 2 objects so that they remain lined up. So let's point out one more thing. So when I run my app, if I were to tap jump first and then walk, I'm still seeing the jump flipbook. So let's add one more script within both of these. Within the jump, just in case I were to have tapped walk previously, I want to set the visibility of flipbook panda walking to off. So I'm going to clone that and adjust this third one to be panda walking off. I'm going to copy this script and then paste it into my walking button. And then just adjust it so that it applies to panda jumping. So now, jump, I only see jumping, walk, I only see walking, and I can toggle back between those. Okay, so let's go back to setting the walk to actually walk across the page. So under the walk button, I'm going to go to scripting when button is touched, and then under animation and set properties, I'm looking for one called set position. I want to set the position of flipbook panda walking. I know that I want my Y value to be 30, and I believe the X that we said was 60. So let's look at that. Now animation transition here. If I make this take 6-ish seconds, then it will take that long to move across the page. Let's test that out. Okay, but now watch what happens. If I go back and I use jump, jumps all the way back over here. So we also need to clone this to make sure that our standing panda and our jumping panda all move just like we want it to, so that they all stay in the same place. So now if I do panda walking, it walks across the page. Now if I tap jump, then jump is also in that same place. So just for the sake of rounding this all out, let's also make one that will show the panda standing again. So in this case, I want the visibility of image named panda to on. I want flipbook off, and this other flipbook is already off. So you can see that does nothing right now, but if I were to jump first and then stand, then it reappears. So that's a little bit of how to set up a flipbook and how to use movement with a flipbook in different ways. So you're simply setting the visibility of these different sets of images, sets of frames to perform different actions, and then you're using scripts to set the visibility of those flipbooks to be on or off and move whenever you need them to. So there are a couple of scripts that actually specifically apply to flipbooks. So let's take a look at those. Let's say that I didn't bother to make a panda standing still image. I'm going to turn that visibility off, and I'm going to turn the visibility of my panda walking back on. But let's say that I don't want that flipbook to start until I push this walking button. The way to do that is to go into scripting, when page is displayed, and add a script in there that's going to stop the flipbook when the page is displayed. So I'm going to animation and set properties and stop flipbook. Spoiler alert, here is start flipbook. We're going to use that one in just a second. So stop flipbook named panda walking. So now you can see when I run my app, this panda is just standing still. So this is a way to avoid the need for that extra image, which avoids the need of making that image object move with the other flipbooks and things like that. So now I go back into my walk button, I go into scripting, when button is touched, animation and set properties, and I want to use start flipbook of panda walking, and I'm going to drag that one all the way up to the top. So the flipbook's going to start before the visibility of the flipbook is set. And then once it is in position and it's been moved, I want to stop the flipbook. So I'm going to go back into animation and set properties, scroll down to stop flipbook, panda walking, and in this case I don't need these position scripts for image. I don't need any of the scripts for the image panda. Once the flipbook has moved and it's all in position along with the other flipbook, I want to have the flipbook stop walking. So I have this here at the end of the list. I want to show you what happens when I run the app. I'm going to tap walk, and you'll see that the flipbook is set to start, and then it goes back to stopping before it's been put into place with the set position script. So let's fix that. The way to get around this, I'm going to copy this script and we're going to paste it into a subroutine back at the page level. And I'm just going to name this stop walking. I'm going to paste that script in here. Okay, so now back in the walk button, I'm going to disable that original script. I'm just going to delete it because I don't need it here anymore and we've already pasted it elsewhere. And then I'm going to schedule that subroutine. So under Program Flow Control, I'm going to go to Schedule Subroutine, and I'm going to use the subroutine Stop Walking, and I'm going to schedule it 6 seconds after all of this starts. So what that means is because my set position script is 6.16 seconds, it's not going to stop walking for 6 seconds. So let's run that and test it out. You can see it's walking, the flipbook is still walking. The flipbook does not stop walking for 6 seconds, which coincides with when the panda makes it to the position that I have set it to. So that's a very basic use of flipbooks to start and stop them. So imagine a game, like a platformer game, where you have a character kind of like this panda walking along and then you need it to jump over something, just like we've done here. You could have that flipbook that it doesn't start doing that thing until the flipbook is visible. In the gaming world, that's actually referred to something called a sprite. So you could use flipbooks in the same sense that you use sprites in other programs. So I want to show you one more thing you can do with a flipbook, and to do that I'm actually going to make this panda not visible so that it's not as distracting. I'm going to add a new flipbook here, and I want to point out the other tabs that we haven't looked at yet here. So we've got the scripting tab and the data tab. Within scripting, you're going to see the same triggers that you see with an image object. So the flipbook is draggable if you have set its draggable property to on. And then within here, you'd have the opportunity to schedule scripts that happen when dragging ends, or when dragging starts, just like the image object. But there's one more tab here, and that's the data tab. Before we look at that, I want to point out the data sets that this ties to. So within WizCreate, you can see a tab here that says Media. On the left-hand side is media that has been pre-built into WizCreate for you to use. One of these folders is datasets, and within here, you can see all the datasets that you have at your disposal to use for whatever you want. So let's say I wanted to use something geography related. So within here, there's a whole bunch of datasets. These are CSVs, or comma-separated values, which means if I click them, I'm really just looking at a bunch of text that's separated by commas. That's the way that a CSV presents itself in this kind of raw file form. But if I were to look at that same data set, I'm going to jump back into the app that we were building in, and I go to the data tab, source dataset, and media library, it's going to take me to that exact same folder that we were just looking at in the media section. So if I go back in there to geography, and I go to that same data set that we were just in, the planets data set, you can see that that same view is here. And then it just needs to know, okay, out of this data set, which column are you wanting me to look at? So the images column within this data set is called image. As soon as I select that, the images within that data set are going to start scrolling over here in this flipbook. So when you're using a data-driven capability with a flipbook, one of the properties changes as far as what it means. Remember earlier with the animation duration, this was how long that entire flipbook would take to get from frame number 1 to frame number whatever the last one was. When you're using data-driven capabilities, your duration here is how long that flipbook should remain on that frame. So if I were to change animation duration to something like 0.5 seconds, you can see these start flipping through faster. If I were to change it to 0.1 seconds, they're really flying through there. So your duration means something different, and that's just because your data set could be hundreds of rows long, and there's no way to really plan for that within your duration. So we've made that a little bit simpler here once you plug in a data set. Notice that the selections that we made within that data tab are repeated here under source dataset and images column. So you could make that same selection here within your main properties tab without needing to go into the datas tab. So we've looked at the start flipbook and stop flipbook scripts. There is one more script that once you are working with data in a flipbook could be useful. So let's look at that now. I'm going to add a new button. And I'm going to set the visibility of these other buttons to off so that they're no longer visibly distracting. All right, so what we're going to use this button for is to change the data set. So when this button is touched, I'm going to use a script called set source dataset. That's under animation and set properties. Set source dataset. So this looks like a bunch of things that we can do here. This is actually a very powerful script. We're just going to be scratching the surface of it here with the flipbook. So it wants to know a couple things from me. First of all, what kind of object are we setting the source data set of? It's a flipbook, and its name is flipbook number 3. The source data set, we're going to pull just another one from the media library. Again, under geography, I'll look for famous volcanoes. We only want the images here, so I'm only going to pull from the images column. And that's it. If we were working with something like a collection object or a table, you could formulate things like the titles and the text, but the flipbook is only going to show image, so that's all we need to select here. So I'm simply going to run my app, and as soon as I select change images, you can see that now we're looking at volcanoes. So with this simple inclusion of data, your flipbook can do a ton of different things, and you can pair it with set source dataset to script a whole bunch of different options, maybe depending on what a user does, or you could also use datasets in the form of sprites. So what I mentioned earlier with our pandas, you could potentially, rather than manually configuring all the different frames of your panda to jump, you could put that in a dataset, and then perhaps your button would be something like a jump button, like on a typical game controller. And then if you did that, when that jump button was pressed, then you would set the source data set of the flipbook to be the jumping data set, and then your panda would be jumping. So play around with that. If you have any questions as you work through that, feel free to reach out to us at whizcreate.com. Happy app making!